Welcome.
Hey, you almost didn't take it that time.
How can I continue to screw this opening up as much as possible and throat singing?
You won't do the Tibetan throat singing.
No, I won't be good enough at it. I'm not. I don't know. I haven't attained enough levels of Buddhism to do the Tibetan throat singing.
Fair enough.
I do have a singing bowl though.
I do too, actually. Mine's from Nepal.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So
yeah.
I win that one.
Yeah, mine is from Tibet. So I win. Clearly.
Oh, okay. Touche. I thought I had you there.
Yeah.
You mean it's from China?
Yeah. Depending upon who you ask. So yeah, Bobby, welcome. And welcome to everybody. If you guys are just tuning in now, this is Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, special homage to Catalonia edition. We have been going through chapter by chapter, every chapter. Professional podcaster here of George Orwell's firsthand account of traveling to Catalonia and banning fascists from life with a machine gun.
We wanted a machine gun, but I don't think he ever got it.
No, you're right. Oh God, you're right. He didn't. Sorry, my headspace has been in Durruti, and Durruti banned plenty of fascists from life with a machine gun. So, and fun fact, by the way, with the Durruti Kickstarter, which is doing really well right now, thanks to AK Press and Behind the Bastards getting on board. Robert Evans, guy whose work I've admired for a number of years, particularly when it comes to terribly introducing his podcasts.
And the ketamine references.
Oh yeah. He got behind it, and now and told people on Behind the Bastards to go and get a copy of Durruti because he thought it was cool. And now I have like almost 100 people at this point have come on to my Kickstarter and commented bastards, just one after another after another.
And only 3 of them are weird right-wingers who hate you.
Yeah, exactly. So that's exciting. But, Durruti and the comic that I am launching right now, it is doing really well. I would not have known who Durruti was without George Orwell, because if you read Homage to Catalonia, and I did many times, you will find references to the friends of Durruti, who just seem badass in general and are constantly out radicaling everyone. So I said to myself, I was like, who's, if there's friends of Durruti, who was this Durruti guy? And then I looked him up and I was like, oh. And 10 years later, here we are. So Bobby, we just passed chapter 11. You want to do a intro? So what happened last chapter? And then we'll jump into this one.
We were going over most of the politics and the fallout of the Barcelona uprising the last couple chapters, and Orwell, being a decent writer, kicks it back up into a little bit more action in this chapter, where he goes back to the front, which I'm sure will end wonderfully for him.
Absolutely, yeah, it's going to end incredibly for him. Now, one of the things that was really interesting actually was, so I had this argument on my wall or something, and somebody had been like, it was one of those right wingers trying to do that like gotcha meme where they say like, oh, but what, like there's like kind of like the ugly guy, and he's like, well, I was going to be a non-binary video game streamer.
God. Yeah, I've seen that going around.
Yeah, and the communist is like, no, go to the gulag, go dig a ditch. And I think I responded to the effect of, it's like, I think I approve of gulagging political streamers. I say this as a political streamer myself.
I was going to say,
no one should listen to us.
Yeah, well, there's a great book, before we get into this short tangent, there's a great book called The Man on Mao's Right, which was written by Mao's English translator. It came out a few years ago. But that guy goes to the penal farm like 5 times over the course of his career. And the last time he goes is just hilarious because he's at an embassy party and somebody's speaking to him frankly, so he thinks it's safe. And then
Oh no.
he criticizes the party, and he just sees the person immediately go and inform on him at the party, and he's just like, God,
Gotta go back to the
to the farm.
Well, so this is very interesting sort of for me here, like, and on this tangent, it got me thinking because somebody else came in and was like, well, actually, you know, I think the Soviets probably would use like the power of streamers to, you know, propagandize people. And the more I thought of it, the more I was like, yeah, no, that's exactly it. And it reminded me of what you were remarking about in the last chapter with the Soviet propagandist hanging out and basically rewriting the story of the war, like in
as
real
it's
time,
happening. Yeah.
as it's happening
To people who were involved in it, and they go for it. Like there's a skill in that. There's like an evil skill that we don't like appreciate that much, because we see that character become a trope over the next, like, I don't know, what is it, like 80, 90 years since this book came out. So like we see the propagandist in so many pieces of art that it's become a trope, but like those people exist. And they might have done it to you and you didn't realize it because they're so good at it.
Everybody likes to think that they're immune to advertising, they're immune to propaganda. No, you're not. I'm sorry.
No.
And like there would definitely be that guy, except, you know, in today's day and age, he would be a streamer. He would have cat ears on, you know, and be ranting about I don't know, red-brown alliances.
I'm picturing like a CIA recruit, and it's like the smallest CIA recruit that they have, or NSA or FBI or whatever. It's like,
you're a cat boy now.
Yeah, you're the only twink in the class, kid. So you're gonna put on the cat ears.
Go put on the cat ears and go play. I don't. What are the kids playing these days?
I've been playing Bioshock Infinite, but that's from 2012.
I played that recently. Actually,
I love that game.
Yeah, just a few months ago. It was pretty good. I'm partial to the first Bioshock. The others didn't really do it for me. The third one, that was a better game. You know, maybe, you know what, canceled. We're just going to stream Bioshock Infinite and tell you, our viewers, exactly what to think. So, Bobby, let's get into this chapter.
Yeah, so Orwell starts off a little bit dull because he's still talking about leaving Barcelona. But in the very first paragraph of the chapter, he actually says that a friend of his that he met in Barcelona tells him that war is a racket the same as any other. And I had to give a shout out to Smedley Butler, who popularized that quote in the United States. And that's true, although Orwell remarks that shocked him deeply, because he's still very idealistic, and he doesn't see how this war is a racket. He points out that war, the exact quote is, the fact is that every war suffers a kind of progressive degeneration with every month that it continues, because such things as individual liberty and truthful press simply are not compatible with military efficiency, which is true, but you see massive profits from every war. Spain specifically in the Great War, World War One, profited massively from the production and sale of weaponry to multiple powers. If you're a fan of Forgotten Weapons,
one of the reasons why its vaults were filled with gold. Being colonialism.
colonialism and selling mass quantities of weapons. If you watch like Forgotten Weapons on YouTube, which is a great channel to check out if you're a gun nerd like me, you'll find like Spanish Mausers and Spanish pistols like proliferated throughout the continent. Like they were making the pistols for the French army from like 1914 to like the end of the war. So Spain had massively profited from it. And even during this
ironic,
war,
they needed weapons and didn't have any.
Well, they exported everything.
Yes.
Well, and then even in this war, people profited massively off of this. We've talked about Texaco selling weapons on credit. Various
selling
shipping,
oil on credit,
or oil on credit.
Rather. Then Texaco wasn't selling weapons, but they were selling oil. Shell was as well, but I think Texaco was the really bad one, inventing the world's first credit card and just giving Franco all the oil he needs to run his war machine, even though it is explicitly illegal.
Yeah, but even so, like they're making money on that sale because
Mhm.
Spain would be paying off that debt for decades.
Oh yeah.
And the same thing with the weapons. The Soviets famously, we've talked about, plundered the Republican gold. Uh, Even today, 2021, we're just getting out of Afghanistan. The defense contractors and defense production companies in this country have profited untold billions of dollars off of 20 years of a comparatively like low intensity conflict by selling
Yeah.
the U.S. military like gear. So that's a real quote, man. Like war absolutely is a racket, and it's disgusting to think about dudes kind of like sitting in a smoke filled room talking about how they're going to profit off of producing weapons of war and death
Mhm.
to forward political goals.
I get the
But
feeling you've been in those rooms before.
not not that high up.
Yeah.
Cigarettes, not cigars in my case, I guess.
There you go. The room you've been in is like, how are these guys gonna fuck us?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. What are we going to do with this useless piece of gear? Um, I could tell you 1,000 stories about that, but we'll go through Catalonia first. He also notes that I can't pronounce this because I've got $5 worth of Spanish, guys, so I sincerely apologize. He says the Caballero government is going.
Caballero, yeah.
Caballero, thank you. So sorry. It's amazing I went to South America. Government would fall and be replaced by a more right-wing government with a stronger communist influence, which happened a week or two later, he notes, which would set itself to break the power of the trade unions. And then he notes, too, that fascism, no doubt by some other politer name, and because the Spanish people are basically decent human beings, would probably take hold after the war ends, which, of course, Franco would actually win. He notes that possibility. He doesn't think it's going to happen at this point, but unfortunately, spoiler alert, it does.
Yeah, sorry, George.
and it's true that like extreme political situations lend themselves to extreme personalities and extreme solutions. In this case, we see the Spanish Revolution starting off as kind of an anarchist revolution in character, but as the material situation like degenerates, it attracts more opportunistic and extreme personalities that take advantage of that pathological situation to forward their own power. And Orwell's noting that it's like moving to the right. He doesn't mean like the fascist right necessarily. He means more like the Stalinist right, right-wing communism. If such a thing could be understood in modern terminology, it'd still be very much a left-wing government, but not what they're actually fighting for, which is another side effect of war. Hegel in the Dialectic kind of talks about synthesis, thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Which from, if I'm not mistaken, is Marx, not Hegel.
No, Hegel. He stole it from Hegel.
That?
Yeah, Marx was young Hegelian. Marx
I see. Well, no, I knew that. I watched this channel, Plastic Pills, and it was like the guy on the channel was saying that it was Marx, not Hegel, who said the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, which I was taught was Hegel, and you are right that it's Hegel. So, oh no, a BreadTube influencer.
Well, technically, we're both wrong because it was Fichte who did it first, and Hegel did it second. But no one ever gives Fichte credit.
Fichte. Who even cares about Fichte?
I do.
I don't even like to say that.
Yeah, nerd. Oh man, but it's a very depressing political situation. With the fascism of Franco or Hitler on the one side and the kind of Stalinism on the other hand. He also knows
the brightness of this new society that has been created, but the fact that there's so many forces that want to strangle it in its cradle, and that the liberal forces at the time prefer fascism to actual liberty, which hasn't changed now that I think about it.
No, he even notes that. He says like that Franco is such a weird anachronism that only millionaires or romantics would want him to win, which feeds right into what you just said. It's like pure ideology to want these weird Spanish fascists to actually take power. And we see like Franco's government like gets some weird credit nowadays. I've been finding that out more and more as I've been reading this book and doing this series with you. But like his government was like horribly inept and only basically survived because of the support of Western allies not wanting a left-wing government to take power in Spain.
Yep. Well, fascists are just, they're not, there's this myth based upon World War II movies that fascists like are extremely efficient and are really good at what they do. They're built up to be this kind of monstrous villain because people are pulling from stuff like Triumph of the Will, and they're pulling from like, and just from the fact that it makes it makes it more dramatic when you have a villain. And, they'll say stuff like, oh, well, Mussolini made the trains run on time. No, he didn't.
I was about to make
never
that same
ran
joke.
on time. You can't make Italian trains run on time. No one can do it. All Mussolini did was tell everyone he made them run on time, and his government was a complete clown show. Same thing with Trump. Fascists are fuck-ups. Like, every single one of them, if they weren't fuck-ups, they would be fascists.
Well, part of that comes from the post-World War II memoirs of a lot of the Wehrmacht and even the SS officers who published memoirs, because they made these mythologies around themselves that they were super efficient, super good, and it was only Hitler's madness that had like kept them from winning the war. Albert Speer, economically, is the one who developed that about the fascist economic system. The minute he got out of jail, which he never should have, if you look up Speer, like bad dude. The minute he got out of jail, he basically started going on talk shows and writing books about how like he was the super efficient economist who was running the economy just great, and it was only the unrealistic expectations of the central government and the bombing campaigns that had stopped it. But it's a myth. Even his daughter would come out later and say like, these people developed myths around themselves. It's not how it happened.
Yeah, definitely not.
But oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's just to say that, like, people don't understand this about Franco, and hopefully they will understand this when the Durruti series gets to Franco as a villain. Like, this guy is both horrifically evil and also just a complete and utter doofus. Like, he carried around the severed hand of Saint Teresa de Avila like it was the freaking nuclear football. The rumor was he slept with it under his bed, and when he died, he was found clutching it. And like that right there, I think is like just an excellent metaphor for fascism, because it's like golden and jeweled on the outside, shriveled and dead on the inside, and probably not actually the thing that it purports to be.
Was it choking him?
Yeah, the relics of saints are usually just like a random hand that somebody shoved in there. It's like, yeah, this is totally a part of the saint. Please give me money now. Was
it choking him when they found him?
She would have been choking him, because if I'm not mistaken, Saint Teresa de Avila she's like known as like a major reformer, like within the church. So yeah, I don't think she would have been keen on Franco, even generations later.
So to get past the politics, we find Orwell going back to Weska, which is still sort of under siege. If you look at the maps from back then, which I didn't produce any, which is an oversight, I'm sorry. Huesca wasn't like completely enveloped, so it's not technically a siege. It's more of a battle of Weska. We find him back at Huesca, where he's almost in the same place as he was a few chapters ago when they captured Fascist Trench. Mm-hmm. He's just a little bit to the right, but he's actually been promoted basically to second lieutenant, which any veterans listening to this, that's the most dangerous rank in the entire military.
Really, what's so dangerous about second
lieutenant's the first officer rank. So like, a PFC has been promoted twice. A second lieutenant's a fresh boot, and they're expected to lead in Orwell's case about 30 guys. So they're fresh into the military, and they're in this position of like fairly decent responsibility, and they have no idea what they're doing. The joke in the army is you never give a lieutenant a map, because they don't know how to read it, and they'll get you lost. Like the classic one is when it gets to be the winter time, it's like, if you're cold, they're cold, get your lieutenants inside. And the absolute worst ones come out of West Point. West Point, you either get like the best officer that you've ever met, which some of the officers I've served under were like the best officers I ever served under were from West Point, or you get the worst officers you've ever served.
No middle ground.
And they're so confident. It's so weird. Like this one came out of West Point, and he was talking to a sergeant major who had been in the army for like 30 years. And the sergeant major was like telling the guy basically how we were going to get through this field problem. and the lieutenant taps his ring on a wall. And he tells the sergeant major like how it's going to happen. So that gives you like a little perspective on like good or bad.
Wow. I mean, it really kind of makes sense with a school like that. You've got people who are good enough to get in that are very talented, and then you get freaking idiots who are privileged enough to get in who are idiots.
Yeah, and so like it gave me a good little chuckle when I found out that he was we call it a butter bar because it's a gold bar is the rank nowadays. So he's in command of a mixed English and Spanish unit, and they'd sent his name in for regular commission, but it wasn't sure whether or not he was actually going to get it. He does note that previously the militia officers had actually refused regular commission because it came with extra pay, and that contradicted the egalitarian nature of the revolution. That would never happen in a modern army. You really want it. One of the primary reasons you rank up in the military nowadays is because you want to get paid. Like a PV1, I think in the US, I was never a PV1, but a fresh private, I think only makes like 22 grand a year coming in.
Ouch.
That defense funding does not go to enlisted pay.
It clearly does not.
No. So Orwell's going up in the world. I guess he was a private in the Lenin barracks when we started this, and now he's a salty second lieutenant. Yeah. He notes that his friend Benjamin had already been gazetted as a captain, and Cop, who we really got to do a separate episode about, maybe on my channel sometime, was in the process of being gazetted major. Just for the sake of argument, Cop is more badass than anyone listening to this will ever be, and he's awesome. I love Cop. The government, he says, couldn't actually dispense with the militia officers because they were basically the combat experienced people that they had, and they were holding the line. But it wasn't actually promoting any of them above the rank of major to keep the higher commands for people that were coming out of their regular army establishment, which you see like some politics sort of hampering the Republican war effort at this point, because you've got these combat experienced officers who have been in since the start of the revolution. Some of them come from other armies with combat experience in World War One, and they won't be promoted above major because the central government's afraid that they'll get command of too many troops and try to overthrow their power.
Well, and not just I mean, well, it was really funny. I was expecting you to take like the establishment line and say that like, oh, the central government's afraid that they're being prejudiced and they're just like, but no, it's 100% about them trying to retain power after losing it, despite completely fucking up to the point where they almost got overthrown and were only saved by people who are acting outside of the system. So, I mean, like kind of an old story. I think there's a perception, I don't know how realistic it is, that because the anarchists took too long to seize like actual political power in Barcelona, that those posts were filled with communists. Yeah. And as a result of that happening, like the anarchists were suppressed. And I think there's probably some truth to that, but also, the idea wasn't simply that like government, we don't want anything to do with it. It's like, no, we're building this new world that is more effective than this government. So let's focus on that rather than, stepping into these bourgeoisie positions of power, which they eventually did. Juan Garcia Oliveira becomes the first anarchist minister of justice, and it is most badass, moment of releases all of the prisoners. I like if you did that in today's like Hollywood, you'd be like, crime is illegal now. But it's because he released like all the prisoners, and and he's like, hey, so we're at war, the fascists are here, I'm gonna let you go, you can fight with us or do whatever, I guess. And they're just like, yeah, we're gonna fight with you, we do not like those guys.
Yeah. Fascist jails are way worse than your jails.
Yeah.
That curiously didn't work out too well in Russia during World War II when they tried that.
Oh, really?
There's a Vori Russian mafia culture in Russian jails where they believe it's dishonorable to depend on the government for anything. Like anything. anything at all. Like if the postman comes to your house, it's like dishonorable in their culture.
Mm-hmm.
So the Vori started like fighting the people who were volunteering in the prisons to go to the Red Army. So,
well, we'll see. But also, you clearly the government is not on the side of ordinary everyday people in that situation. Yeah. So you almost can't blame them for it, but I also still blame them for it.
Yeah. I mean, they weren't like ideological anarchists, they were organized criminals. So
yeah.
But it is funny that he notes that the new officers who are above the rank of major are all still training in the School of War from the central government. So they're all learning how to tap their rings on things. So he's in this weird situation where the division commander, brigade commanders, and battalion commanders are all majors. So it's like, they can't do away with these like experienced officers, but they really don't want to promote them any further. But practicum dictates your action sometimes. So just promote the guy, give him a little star, give him a division. So he's actually in a salient at this point, which is an interesting military position. This is going to be a little bit of military science nerddom. A salient is basically, if you have your front line, imagine like a vertical line, a salient is a bulge into that line.
Okay.
So it's a very advantageous position for the people holding the salient because you can, and this might sound a little suggestive. I was thinking about this earlier and trying to find a better way to phrase it, but I can't. If your forces penetrate the enemy lines from the tip of the salient, right? You can penetrate into the enemy's rear lines and cut off the enemy on the front lines, which is super suggestive. But you can see the advantage in that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're also at a really severe disadvantage as you're holding that salient. Both sides, by the way, have to have longer front lines because of that salient. So both sides want to get rid of it and rationalize their front line. But you're also at a disadvantage because you can be shot at from three sides on a salient, right? You can be shot at from the front and defilade or the sides on enfilade, which is really dangerous. You don't want to get shot at from a position you can't see. And the other thing is that the enemy, if they pinch out the salient at the base of it, they encircle all your guys and they're cut off from supplies.
I can see that. So basically it's like you've got like a line, you got the line here.
Yeah.
Got the other line here, and then like the salient is like a line that's like whoop, whoop.
Yeah, exactly. The most famous one is Kursk, which was the biggest tank battle of World War II. The Battle of the Bulge was an encirclement, but there was a salient there too. And that would be very super important during World War II. So Orwell's in this kind of World War II position, but they're using World War I tactics in that they're all in trenches and they're setting up like sniper positions. Orwell notes that the fascist trenches were 150 yards away. That's not that far. That sounds really far, but the rifles that these guys are using are designed to shoot like 2,000 meters for volley fire. And point target, like the shape of a man, you could hit somebody easily at like 500 meters with one of these weapons. So 150 yards is almost point blank range for one of these. Not point blank, but it's almost difficult to miss range that we're talking about using iron sights if you know what you're doing. So they're pretty close to each other. Most engagements actually take place at or below that distance in modern warfare. Before that, in World War I, at the beginning of World War I, people really thought that we would be engaging at like 2,000 meters with volley fire and mass ranks, but that's not how anything ever worked out. If you actually get your hands on one of these old antique rifles, you'll laugh because most of them had anti-aircraft sights on them that you can flick up, which is the most wishful thinking in the world, hitting an aircraft with a bolt-action rifle. But a lot of them are really legitimately designed to be sighted for about 2,000 meter volley fire, even at this point.
So they're pretty close to the fascists, is what you're telling me, and
you should keep your head low,
George.
Yeah, you should keep your head very, very low. He even notes that the chief trouble were snipers that they're at a right angle salient, and I just dropped my book and I am going to pick it up because
professional podcasting,
very professional operation, very premium operation here. Right angle salient. Okay. Oh, he also notes that the mosquitoes are becoming a nuisance. And in spite of clean clothes, they were almost immediately lousy. So I was talking about that, in earlier chapters, and I think you thought I was a little crazy for talking about it, but like military discipline and hygiene are super important in this situation, because these guys aren't really trained for that. They don't know what they're doing, so they don't know how to keep the mosquitoes away, and they're getting lousy because they can't change their clothes out, or they don't know to change their clothes out, or change their socks or whatever, so they're going to get trench foot. That decreases their combat effectiveness significantly.
It definitely does. You're covered in mosquito bites. You're a little woozy from the loss of blood. You've got trench foot. No,
you've got lice. I mean, you're even if you're still like physically combat effective, your morale is going down, and you're not going to be willing to stand your ground and fight as much if you're defending a diseased position. And then of course again, because they don't know really how to dig proper dugouts, they flooded, and his parapet, which was like a sniper position that they had set up, sank half a foot. And then there were more days digging out sticky clay with what he calls wretched Spanish spades, which have no handles and bend like tin spoons. So this is like triggering me, because these are like basic soldier skills that you learn when you come into the military, like digging a hole properly, not having it flood out when it rains, and these are things that really did play a role in what would eventually happen with this war, much to the detriment of humanity, specifically in Spain. And it's something that you might not notice just reading this.
Well, also one can argue worldwide, because there is, I don't know how credible it is, but there is a case you can make that if the fascists had been stopped in Spain, it might have worked as a check on Hitler's ambition, which then might have had him, eventually driven from office without World War II. Now, I think that's a bit, of a... that's a bit rosy glasses, but who knows? This is a weird world, and stranger things have happened.
That's true. It's also one of those counterfactual things where you can take it to like an extreme. Like what if you're gonna go down the whole counterfactual rabbit hole? It's like, what if Winston Churchill had dragons during the Battle of Britain?
Would have gone pretty well, I would have thought.
Pretty good. Well, depending on how fast the dragon can go versus a Stuka,
Well, we'll find out. And of course, also the dragon scales. And this podcast is now about dragons in World War II.
There's probably a conspiracy podcast about that somewhere.
I'm feeling like I feel like if I wanted to, I could launch like a Kickstarter for like a game about World War II with dragons, and like I'd get $100,000.
You probably would. You probably would.
You get the right art on it,
and then you just run away with it. And continuing a trend with Orwell that we alluded to when we were doing our little intro, he says they had promised them a trench mortar, and he was looking forward to it greatly. So George Orwell is just a size queen with the guns, man. He just really wants a big gun.
The machine gun. He wants the trench mortar. He just wants to see things go boom.
Yeah, I won't blame him. But the trench mortar is actually a recent development in warfare. We think of like mortars as being ubiquitous. One of the basic jobs you can get if you join the army is 11 Charlie mortarman. I think it's 10 weeks of basic and then 2 weeks of on-site unit training, and you're a mortar man. Congratulations, kid. But mortars hadn't really been a thing in war, trench mortars specifically, up until like World War One. And these had been like experimented with over the 4 years of trench warfare, because they give you a great advantage in trench warfare in that you can put a really accurate indirect fire onto the enemy trench, meaning that you don't have to expose yourself to fire. And you can just lob a mortar round over the top of your trench. Excuse me. Yeah. The dangerous thing about that is that you really need to be trained how to use them,
or you're gonna hit yourself.
Well, you won't hit yourself probably, because you'd have to put the tube basically vertically to do that. The dangerous thing about a mortar is that you could hit friendlies if you're behind their lines, but the other thing is that the tube heats up. So if you're firing too fast, you're going to blow yourself up. And Afghans and Iraqis would do that a lot during the War on Terror because they weren't trained.
And they just keep lobbing mortar, bang.
Boom. Yeah. And I mean, you also draw counterfire because it's not too hard to figure out where a trench mortar is shooting from. So they're going to shoot back at you, and you're sitting on a bunch of mortar shells, and that's not good for you.
It definitely would not be good for you. Plus, I'm also wondering what you do after the war. And, you're like, you show up and it's like, I can launch mortars. Well, don't launch mortars anymore. But mortaring's all I know.
There's a famous scene in Eugene Sledge's book, which I can't remember the title of, but it's also in the Pacific that HBO did a few years ago, where Eugene Sledge, who was in the Pacific Theater, is applying to college immediately after the war. And the lady who's admitting him is asking him what skills he learned in the Army. She's like, did you learn how to type? No. Did you learn how to do this or that? Or you operate a radio? He's like, nope. She's like, what did they teach you? And he's like, they taught me how to kill Japanese. And I was really good at it.
Well, we don't have much call for that.
Yeah, she's like, oh, Jesus. Oh my God. But yeah, you actually do have to do math back then for a trench mortar. Nowadays, you have a lot of computerized and laser, all kinds of fancy targeting systems for mortars. Back then, you actually literally had to figure out the charge and the distance and the angle of the mortar and everything.
Oh God, do not let elementary school teachers know about that.
It's disturbing, but my best friend is in college right now too, and he was doing a calculus course, and they had him apply the calculus to figuring out the yield of a Hellfire missile on a soft target. And this is like a community. This is like a state college. This isn't like a weird military school. And I was like really disturbed that they were doing that.
Yeah,
but that's kind of the effect of having a society that's been at war for 20 years, is that we start to kind of become numb to the horror of that sort of thing. I
mean, because human stress is relative, and humans adapt to their surroundings. So whatever's going on around you for a long enough time just simply becomes normal.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't react to it the same way. The only way we understand things really is by contrast.
Yeah. And he's seen what a Hellfire missile will do to a soft target. So it really gets to him a little more.
I would think in this day and age, you could say to your professor, hey, you're triggering me, and they might take you seriously.
Yeah.
He probably doesn't want to say that though. But
that's his business on that one. But Orwell notes that the fascists, since the last time he assaulted their trenches, they were better manned, and they had grown more alert, and they had scattered tin cans outside their wire so that you would make a noise coming up to them, and that they actually would open up with machine guns if they just heard a clank. So they're getting serious. In the daytime, they would actually snipe from no man's land. By crawling 100 yards, he says, you could get to a ditch hidden by tall grasses, which commanded a gap in the fascist parapet. And they had set up a rifle nest. So they basically set up cover. They had concealment, and they created cover. So the difference between those two things is that concealment hides you. So concealment's like a bush, and cover will typically stop a bullet.
Makes sense.
So they set up enough to stop counterfire. He says that he had several shots and he doesn't know if he hit anybody. He says it is most unlikely, as I'm a very poor shot with a rifle, but it was rather fun.
Very British of you, George.
At least he's admitting that he's a bad shot now. That's why he wants the machine gun. But he'll
do much better with it.
Well, accuracy by volume, man. Statistically, the fascists, he notes, didn't know where the shots were coming from too. So that's a very good position that he had set up. But about 10 days in, Orwell stupidly sticks his head up. So he says it was at the corner of a parapet at about 5 o'clock in the morning. So the sun's probably coming up at this point. This was always a dangerous time because we had the dawn at our backs. And if you stuck your head above the parapet, it was clearly outlined against the sky. I was talking to sentries preparatory to changing the guard. And suddenly actually, I'll stop there for a second. The getting hit in a firefight, and the U.S. government spent a lot of money to figure this out back in the day, is a function not of enemy accuracy, but of how long you're actually exposed to fire. So it's if you're just sitting out there for long enough, a bullet's going to find you basically. In the 60s, they developed this insane project called Project Salvo, which was meant to shoot 5 bullets at the same time out of a rifle to maximize the potential of hitting somebody, but didn't work out. But they figured out that your exposure is what actually causes you to get hit. So Orwell's standing talking to the dude, smoking and joking, and he's silhouetted against the sun. So he knows this. So this is where you need a good non-commissioned officer to grab the lieutenant and pull him under the parapet.
Yeah. What the hell are you
What are
doing?
you doing? Every sniper in Spain is over there. So this is not good. And then he says, suddenly in the very middle of saying something, he felt it. It was very hard to describe what I felt, although I remember it with the utmost vividness. Roughly speaking, it was a sensation of being at the center of an explosion. There seemed to be a loud bang and a blinding flash of light all around me. And I felt a tremendous shock. No pain, only violent shock, such as you would get from an electric terminal. With it a sense of utter weakness, a feeling of being stricken and shriveled up into nothing. The sandbags in front of me receded into immense distance. I fancy you would feel much the same if you were struck by lightning. I knew immediately that I was hit, but because of the seeming bang and flash, I thought it was a rifle nearby that had gone off accidentally and shot me. So he's thinking like, oh God, one of my dudes shot me. All this happened in the space of time, very much less than a second. So Orwell is actually hit right in the throat, and I'm dropping something in the private chat. I don't know if you're able to put it up. But Cop would actually later draw a diagram of kind of where Orwell was hit. We'll go into what happens next in a minute. But George Orwell is the luckiest person on the face of the planet because the bullet that hit him was probably a 7mm Mauser. So it's a full-sized rifle cartridge, roughly equivalent to like a 30-06, give or take. So he gets hit at an angle in his throat, and it passes straight through and misses his spine and his carotid and his jugular. So it's $1 million shot, basically. This dude was aiming at his head, and it just goes like straight through and misses everything vital as he goes down. The reason that kind of happened is that the bullet that would hit him has a very small primary wound channel. So when you get shot, there's a primary and a secondary wound channel, and there's other terms for this too. But the primary wound channel or the permanent wound channel is the hole that goes through you. And the secondary is basically an expansion caused by the bullet going through you that eventually retracts. So what happens to Orwell is that the primary is very thin, even though the secondary probably pinches a bunch of his nerves, as we'll discuss further here. So basically, Orwell's super lucky, but still keep your freaking head down, George.
I love that I brought you on for this because when I read this, I was like, oh, he got shot in the neck. That probably hurt.
No.
And you're giving me like play-by-play.
Yeah. like in all seriousness, like a centimeter to the right or the left, and he wouldn't have written this book.
Oh, geez.
Then again, like a couple inches.
One of the greatest writers of all time.
Yeah. Then again, a couple inches to the right or to the left, and the bullet would have missed him. So, but yeah, the sniper hits him dead on. The next thing he knows is that an American sentry he was talking to goes, "Gosh, are you hit?" And I'm just picturing Goofy for some reason. "Gosh, Mickey, you got shot."
Oh no, I'm not thinking it's like that. I'm thinking it's like just like almost one of the well, gosh, fella, you got hit.
Oh, it's like a 20s guy, like, gee willikers, 23 skidoo, you sure got hit in the throat there, buddy.
Fun fact, I know the actual origin of 23 skidoo. Communications professors across the country will tell you that this is not the case, but I will tell you that the real reason it was called 23 skidoo, and it was because it was on 23rd Street in the Flatiron District of New York, near where I used to work. And there was as the it was either like an above ground train, or it may have been like wind coming up from the heat pipes underneath the city, but it would cause women's dresses to fly up when they walked across this area. Yeah. So the cops would say 23 skidoo, as in, hey, asshole on 23rd Street who's leering, get out of here before I arrest you.
I actually used to hang out in the Flatiron, so I have heard that story. Flatiron Bar, guys, if you're in New York, pop in there. You might see Bob. I'll be really drunk.
The Flatiron District in general is pretty incredible. So Bobby, let's continue. So George has this terrible wound. The people who are with him are being no help. He has been shot in the neck, completely it's totally his fault.
Yeah, it is. Well,
And he's dying, but he's not dying because
yeah,
he was, yeah.
yeah. So people, he says people gathered round and it was the usual fuss. Lift him up. Where's he hit? Get his shirt open. The American called for a knife to cut my shirt open. I knew there was one in my pocket and tried to get it out, but discovered my right arm was paralyzed. And that's probably some sort of nerve damage that he's gotten from being shot near his spinal cord. Not being in pain, I felt a vague satisfaction. This ought to please my wife, I thought. She'd always wanted me to be wounded, which would save me from being killed when the big battle came.
Oh my gosh,
what a great marriage. I hope you lose a leg, hon.
So you know what? I kind of feel like that would be my wife's attitude if I ever went to war, which is like, I hope he gets hurt, so just a little, so he doesn't get killed.
Yeah. There's a great scene in Paths to Glory, which is a great Kubrick movie. Where they're speaking about fearing death versus fearing pain, and the soldiers come to the conclusion, and it's kind of true, that you're more afraid of like being hurt than you are of being killed. The guy says like you don't go out of the trench without your helmet because you don't want to get like your like skull cracked, but you don't mind that the machine gun bullet's coming at you because you know that's quick. But you won't give up your gas mask because you don't want to get gassed. But I had that thought when I was in Afghanistan. I was thinking like, well, if I lose a leg, I can still type and everything, and I'll be okay. I didn't, thank God. I'm all my fingers and toes.
Still here.
Yeah,
mostly whole.
Yeah, but but his wife just wants him to get shot.
Please, fascists, shoot my husband. Shoot my idiot husband.
Not too bad though.
Now, this fascinated me, by the way. That guy that you were arguing with online a while ago, Gad Sad.
Yeah, that guy's name.
Is that how his name is?
It is, yeah.
So somebody like it pops up. One of his videos like pops up in my mentions. I'm like, why the hell am I getting videos from this asshole?
What does that mean?
And he was going on for it was like a 10-minute video where the entirety of the video was just like, he was doing that thing where it's like all societies want to steal the other society's women, but they can't do it because the men will stop them, except now Biden is in charge, and if Trump had been in charge, we never would have pulled out of Afghanistan. And I'm watching this weirdo with like shriveled wallet skin. Like it looks like he crawled into a tanner and like set it on like a strip of bacon. And,
he does.
Yeah. And like, like someone dehydrated the world's most interesting man's.
Oh God, that's what he looks like.
And like, so I'm watching this and I'm just thinking Bobby should see this.
Oh no, I'll have to take a look. That guy.
Yeah. Just because of I know that you've got a history with him, and also because his opinions on war have got to be the most ridiculous I've ever seen.
You can always tell somebody who hasn't actually seen war, and that dude just like, from what you're telling me, he hasn't gotten past the taking of the Sabine women from like ancient Roman mythology. Yeah. Like it's 2021, my dude. We have got other motivations.
So let's get out of that and let's continue onwards here.
So it only occurs just now to Orwell to think about where he was hit, which is understandable because he's probably in shock and he's like, oh my God. He says he could feel nothing, but he was conscious that the bullet had struck me somewhere in the front of the body. When I tried to speak, I found that I had no voice, only a faint squeak. But at a second attempt, I managed to ask where I was hit. In the throat, they said, which maybe don't tell him that. Like, just tell him he's going to be okay, because that would worry you. You want to keep a casualty calm. Like, where was I hit? Like, you're gonna be okay, bud. Like,
they grazed you.
Yeah, it's not bad. But this guy just blurts out, "You got shot in the throat, George."
You got shot in the throat, son.
Yeah, that ain't good.
I'll tell you what. I'll take off my my muscle shirt and
yeah, they've already cut his shirt open for no reason. You got hit in the throat. Wasted a perfectly good shirt.
Maybe they thought he might have been hit more than once.
Yeah, that's possible.
Or they're just idiots.
So Harry Webb, our stretcher bearer, had brought a bandage and one of the little bottles of alcohol they gave out for field dressings. They lifted me up, and a lot of blood poured from my mouth. Yeah, because he got shot in the throat. And I heard a Spaniard behind me say that the bullet had gone clean through my neck. I felt the alcohol, which at ordinary times would sting like the devil, splash on the wound as a pleasant coolness. So they're at least trained to disinfect the wound, because we've just talked about like the unsanitary conditions that they were in. And if, you don't want a wound to get infected in general, but especially not one right there, because that would kill him. I'm going to pause right here to just talk about the implications of him getting shot. A sniper, this is like the ideal sniper casualty. A sniper doesn't necessarily want to kill somebody, because if they just shot George in the head and he had fallen over, we would have lost one of the greatest writers in the 20th century. But also, that would just be one guy that they're taking out of the fight. Instead, he's horrifically wounded George, and now he's taken like 4 or 5 people off the front lines to tend to the casualty. That also might create additional opportunities for him to hit somebody who's trying to come help him, which is another common sniper tactic. And the other thing is, we talked about tactical, operational, and strategic levels of warfare here. This one wound, believe it or not, actually has implications at all 3 levels. So tactically, they've taken a second lieutenant out of a fight. So this is a leader of 30 men that's taken off the front line. That's bad. And that's 1 less rifle. Operationally, they've lost an officer. They've lost one of the foreign volunteers, which will affect the foreign volunteers' morale going forward, because a lot of these guys knew him. It's like, oh, God, did you hear George got shot in the throat? Oh, geez. That's going to plunge morale down. And strategically, when Orwell goes back to England, people are going to see that this guy got mangled in the throat fighting in Spain, and that might affect the flow of foreign volunteers going forward. So that sniper should have gotten a medal. Probably didn't, because they had no idea who he shot. But
no, that makes a lot of sense. And George being taken out of commission here, I hadn't thought of it more in just you're not just losing one man. You're losing everyone that it takes to care for him. You're affecting them on the issue of morale. That's a fascinating way to think about war, and also interestingly enough, a very collectivist way to think about it.
War is a collective action. Like anyone who has like these weird Rambo fantasies about like individual guys like making all the difference in war, it's not true. Even like commanding generals get like this aura of like godhood put around them, but if you have a great general and a terrible army, you're probably not going to win a war.
It's somewhat fascinating actually when you talk about it, that the exposure time to the bullets is what hits you. Is what gets you hit, and it kind of makes it almost feels like radiation.
A little bit. Except radiation is a little more gradual. But like if you think about it, the way that you do rifle qualification in the Army now trains you to make the most of exposure, because even though they never work right, to qualify on an M16 in basic, you have to do the pop-up range. So you get a 25, 75, 150. I think it's a 200 and a 300. It's been a long time since I've done it, so sorry, kids. Someone will correct me in the comments. But the targets pop up and you have to hit them. So you have so many seconds for a target to pop up and hit it and qualify with your rifle. So if you're thinking about it in terms of exposure, you have to train your guys to make the most of the enemy exposing themselves. More suggestive language. But Orwell's just standing there perfectly exposed. His head's above the parapet, and he's literally outlined against the sun. So that's making that exposure even more valuable for the sniper, because you only have so many seconds as the sniper to aim and fire that shot. In World War I think the maximum amount of time they told the sniper to take aim and fire was about 2 seconds. So you have to make the decision to aim your shot and take it. And Orwell got hit by aim fire.
That he aimed and he took it, and shot one of the greatest writers in the world in the neck. And
he probably knows who he is, because his book got published probably within his lifetime.
Hey, it's this guy.
I did that one. That was me. It's weird. And this is again why you don't tell people how badly they're wounded. Orwell says, I took it for granted that I was done for. I'd never heard of a man or an animal getting a bullet through the middle of the neck and surviving it, which I haven't either, to be honest with you, which is why I'm so fixated on him being the luckiest Englishman on the planet at this point. The blood was dribbling out of the corner of my mouth. The artery's gone, I thought. I wondered how long you last with your carotid artery out. Not long enough to think about it, George. Not many minutes, presumably. Everything was very blurry. There must have been about 2 minutes during which I assumed that I was killed. And that too was interesting. I mean, it is interesting to know what your thoughts would be at such a time. My first thought conventionally enough, was for my wife. My second was a violent resentment for having to leave this world which, when all is said and done, suits me so well. I had time to feel this very vividly. The stupid mischance infuriated me, the meaninglessness of it. To be bumped off, not even in a battle, but in this stale corner of the trenches, and thanks to a moment's carelessness, not quite a few moments there, George, I thought too of the man who had shot me, wondered what he was like, whether he was a Spaniard or a foreigner, whether he knew he had got me, and so forth. So it's interesting kind of what he thinks about in those what he thinks are his last seconds.
Yeah.
And he is right. It's kind of meaningless, but that's how war is. We have these romantic notions that like you're going to be in like a Lord of the Rings cavalry charge saving the day, but you know most of war is like this. You're in a meaningless position when you get picked off. For me, I was shot at with like mortars and rockets all the time. Like you do get to resent the guy shooting at you, and I've had those same thoughts about people who've shot at me. He reflects, though, that if he was a fascist, I would have killed him if I could. But if he had been taken prisoner and brought before me at this moment, I would merely have congratulated him on his good shooting. It may be, though, if you were really dying, your thoughts would be quite different. I also think, though, it's interesting that his last thoughts are about how much he loves the world, which is kind of inspiring, that his last thoughts are of kind of humanity and the humane in nature. Which is really, it speaks to his character, but it also kind of speaks to the cause with which he was fighting for, rather than these like insane fascist death cults that we see developing in Europe at this point. His last thoughts are about how much he loved the world. And, you know, I'm not saying like a fascist couldn't have that thought. I'm sure many probably did, not enough. But it's important to note the ideology that he had in mind as he was volunteering for this war.
Mm-hmm. Which, you know, again, Orwell did not go there intending to be shot. He didn't go, you know, he went there intending to write articles and got inspired immediately and was just like, okay, no, I'm going to go do this. And his wife is like, you're going to get shot.
Don't do it.
I won't get shot, honey. Or if I do get shot, I'll be grazed a little bit. And then you can.
Meanwhile, he's gonna have to wear an ascot for the rest of his. I always wondered why he wore that ascot in all of his photos.
And now you know.
And now I know.
Because he has a bullet hole in his neck.
I'd leave it open, man. Scare people.
You know, like Orwell also so it's very interesting that his thoughts went there in his final moments, because you can compare that also to Dostoevsky, which he was supposed to be executed. And at the last minute was granted a reprieve. But just beforehand, he kind of came to grips with his own coming death. And as a result, wound up feeling this intense love of the world and love of life, and you know, essentially experiencing a mini Satori enlightenment. He wrote the book The Idiot all about that. I was like, what if I stayed like that for the rest of my life in those moments when I thought I was dead? So it's a very important experience, I think, for a writer to have. You know, George definitely, the fact that he was able to live through that and come back and experience it, I think that's one of the major things, you know, behind the scenes that's driving his literary genius.
Yeah, it's beautiful prose in a horrific situation for him.
Mm-hmm.
And he knows he's going to live, though, because his right arm comes to life and hurts really badly, which again is the nerve damage that I'm sure he got really badly. He thought that he broke it falling down, but he didn't. It's just the bullet passing so close to his basically central nervous system. Mm-hmm. And then we start to see the anarchist operation for caring for the wounded. He's brought back to a casualty clearing station. And a doctor rebandaged the wound, gave him a shot of morphine, and sent him off to a place called Cemiento. The hospitals there are hurriedly constructed wooden huts, and you were supposed to only be kept there for a couple of hours before moving on to bigger hospital facilities, a more permanent facility. This is actually fairly recent technology. Field ambulances were only developed during the Napoleonic Wars, like 100 years before writing this, by a crazy French French aristocrat who would basically run to the front line, grab a dude under fire, and bring him back. World War I had obviously brought that technology and training on a lot. I believe Hemingway was an ambulance driver during the war, and Nietzsche was a stretcher bearer during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. Yeah, like a lot of famous people are stretcher bearers, but it's something that's kind of a recent phenomenon. So it's kind of interesting that they were able to catch on to this concept so quickly. He does note that the Spanish hospital methods are not great. He says he was in an untreated state, and a nurse tried to force him to eat soup, eggs, and greasy stew.
I remember this so well. He described it really well. I can see exactly what that stew looks like. In my mind, it's almost like egg drop soup quality.
Yeah. And he says he's swallowing blood constantly, and this poor woman doesn't know what she's doing, and the regulations say that he has to eat, so she's trying to force food down a throat that's been shot through by a 7mm bullet. He asked for a cigarette, which is also, she probably could have smoked through the wound at that point. But they note that this is one of the times when there was a tobacco famine, so there wasn't a cigarette in the whole area.
I love that that's what George is sitting there with a hole in his neck. He can't even get a cigarette, and she's force feeding him
like
greasy soup.
Greasy Spanish soup. It's like I'm picturing like an awful paella. Just like, the rice is too overdone. He's just like, oh, it's gloop. Help.
Literary genius George Orwell.
Or like the egg is just like a whole egg that she's trying to put in his mouth. He's coughing up blood. Oh, look, hot sauce. No, it's blood. Stop. You can't talk either, so you can't really protest too much. So his friends show up, and you think that they're there to visit him, which they are, to check on him. But the first thing they say is, hello, glad you're alive. We want your watch, your revolver, and your electric torch, and your knife if you've got one. So that does kind of show you the situation on the front's not great logistically. They have to come back to the wounded guy and get all his stuff. It's also good for them that he didn't die in no man's land, because the war production at this point for the Republicans is not good. So anybody who dies in no man's land or in a fascist position or in a position that gets overrun, you're not getting that rifle back, and your production's not keeping up with your need. So that metal that goes into that rifle, or the bullets, the production or import of those bullets, you're not getting that back. So it's a loss. That's a loss not only of a body, but of the resources that guy is carrying, which would become a key factor. It was a key factor in World War I, but it would become especially key in World War II. People kept really good records of it. For instance, Stalingrad was a loss not only of all those men for the German army, but it was a year's worth of production for the German war economy. So that's on the macro, but on the micro, the Republicans have to be careful of each rifle that they lose, which also kind of shows you something we saw in the last chapter. Orwell doesn't see any submachine guns on the front, never remarks about it, and he always wants one, right?
Right.
But you saw submachine guns behind the lines. That I think is a function. I don't have anybody's diary or anything to say this 100%, but that could be a function of the central government being worried that those are perishable resource that they can't reproduce. So they're keeping them behind the line for pacification rather than risking them at the front. But at the same time, they're making their troops at the front less effective because they're more afraid to risk their perishable resources.
So essentially, the Republican government are just terrible at war.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
They're terrible at governmenting. They're terrible at war.
Yeah. You got to be really careful with perishable resources like that. So his friends make off with what he notes as all of his portable possessions, and that this always happened when a man was wounded. Everything he possessed was promptly divided up, quite rightly, for watches, revolvers, and so forth were precious at the front. And if they went down the line to a wounded man's kit, they were certain to be stolen somewhere along the way. So it's like, oh, at least my friend stole my stuff.
Hey, George, we're glad you're not dead. Give us your stuff.
Yeah, we want your stuff. I want half your stuff. Nagans in each hospital.
All the cool stuff.
All the cool stuff. You can keep your boots, I guess. Now, unfortunately for George, the roads in Spain are not good, and they're not really great at transporting people. So they kind of put him in the back of a truck. And he's got this sensitive throat wound and nerve damage, and he's describing it as a bang, bump, wallop. It took me back to my early childhood and a dreadful thing called the wiggle woggle at the White City Exhibition. They had forgot to tie us onto the stretchers, and I had enough strength in my left arm to hang on, but one poor wretch was split onto the floor and suffered God knows what agonies. Another walking case who was sitting at the corner of the ambulance vomited all over the place. The hospital in Barbaresto was very crowded, and the beds were so close together that they were almost touching. The next morning, they loaded a number of us onto the hospital train and sent us to another city. So you also see that, like, even though it's low intensity at Weska, you're seeing a constant stream of casualties. So when you start off a war, you usually have more war fighting potential than you do at the end of a war. It's kind of like exercising a muscle because you're expending resources. And in this case, they're expending people. And as we've discussed in a previous episode, the Republican forces were 450,000 at the beginning of the war and 450,000-ish at the end of the war. So they were replacing losses, but they never really expanded, whereas the fascist forces got up to 600,000. So as they're expending these men, the fascist forces are getting stronger in a war of position that we've been talking about. So that bodes very poorly for you as the leftist revolutionaries in this case. And it's just something you probably wouldn't notice unless you were thinking about it reading this. There's this poor gentleman that I highlighted here, an English-speaking Dutch communist heard that there was an Englishman in the hospital and befriended me, and he brought me English newspapers. He'd been terribly wounded in the October fighting and had somehow managed to settle down at Loretta Hospital and had married one of the nurses. Thanks to his wound, he had one of his legs all shriveled till it was no thicker than my arm. So yeah, these people are getting like permanent damage from this conflict. This poor guy has one leg that's smaller than the other.
But he got married. He found love.
He found love, and I guess she didn't mind. He meets another guy that's completely basically encased in a body cast, and they can't take it off until he gets to the permanent hospital. So this poor guy is just... after a few days, I was able to get up and walk around with my arm in a sling. So yeah, he's definitely got some nerve damage at this point. For some reason, it hurt much more when it hung down. I also had, for the time being, a good deal of internal pain from the damage I had done myself in falling, and my voice had disappeared almost completely. But I never had a moment's pain from the bullet wound itself. It seems that's usually the case. I wouldn't know. I've never been shot, but that seems legit. The tremendous shock of a bullet prevents the sensation locally, and a splinter of the shell or bomb, which is jagged, usually hits you less hard and would probably hurt like the devil. So again, he's super lucky that bullet went straight through and didn't fragment and go all into his throat. But he can't talk at this point. He notes that the hospitals are all at capacity, and I dropped my book again. Because COVID. No one wants to get a... Well, this country had just survived the Spanish flu, too.
And by the way, it was just as bad back then with people not wanting to take basic health measures. One of the like the major bishops was like, no, we will have these religious festivals and we will gather together. And it like even harkened back to, I think, the days of the Black Plague, when people would come through the town whipping themselves to try to make the plague go away. And like they're bleeding all over everything, and people are running up and like putting the blood on shirts and then pressing it to their face to try to ward off the plague. It's one of the reasons why I'm a little more, I guess, optimistic about COVID than a lot of people are, just because, yeah, it's a complete clusterfuck now, but historically humans, we've not had good responses to disease, like at all. It has never been competent.
No. Something disturbing, though, is that while he's at this hospital, he says that it's the latest medical practice to basically leave like a mesh over an open wound. And he's saying like under the mesh, you could see the half red jelly of a head wound. There was one man who was wounded in the face and throat who had his head inside of a sort of spherical helmet of butter muslin, and his mouth was closed up, and he breathed through a little tube that was fixed between his lips. Poor devil, he looked so lonely, wandering to and fro, looking at you through his muslin cage and unable to speak. So that's like the human cost of war that's almost never in media about war, especially recent media, is that you might see somebody wounded, but like you never see like the horrific process it takes to come back from modern warfare. Because, I mean, even more than like medieval warfare, modern weapons just do awful things to the human body. We're talking about like bullets that are traveling faster than the speed of sound, high explosives that can like liquefy you, gas hasn't been used in like 100 years, but it still exists. Napalm dropped from the sky, thermobaric weapons now, all kinds of weird shrapnel, landmines. It's horrific. And if you're ever thinking about like, oh, it'd be fun to go to war, like it's not. And you're going to see stuff like that, and you don't want that. But curiously, though, he's basically in a seaside town at this hospital. And he goes outside and he says, it was queer to see the seaside life going on almost as usual. The smart cafes along the promenade and the plump local bourgeoisie bathing and sunning themselves in deck chairs as though there had not been a war within 1,000 miles. Nevertheless, as it happened, I saw a bather drowned, which would have, one thought would have been impossible in the shallow, tepid sea. So I guess you're not safe anywhere, but also life does go on behind the front, even when at war. And it's a really weird process coming back to that. We saw that when he went back to Barcelona, how he was like not really able to appreciate it as much because he had been on the front. But nowadays you have people, not now, but back when we were in Afghanistan, people going to Afghanistan for 10 to 15 months, 3 months if you're in the Air Force and you're weak. It's a little Air Force dig. Sorry, guys.
And you come home and somebody's mad that Shira doesn't have as large breasts as she used to.
Yeah. I missed the beginning of that trend when I was overseas, and like I had like there's a great book called The Forever War that's about exactly what I'm talking about right now, which if you haven't read it, you should. It's about a guy who's drafted for a war in the future, and because of relativity, while he deploys for like 8 months, 25 years passes on his home on Earth, and he keeps deploying until it's like 2,000 years in the future, but it only like 5 or 10 years have passed for him because of relativity. And it's really about coming back from Vietnam and feeling alienation, but it's also a really cool story. At the end of the story, they've actually kind of achieved like automated gay space communism. And everyone's genetically engineered, and they're all gay except for him because he's like the last free birth guy, and all his troops are making fun of him, which is a hilarious kind of turnaround from something that would have been published in the 70s. It's like, look at that guy, he's weirdo, he likes girls. He's just trying to get a drink alone at the bar, but it's a great
women
book.
Women are only for breeding.
Oh no, like they're all like vat grown. So
they're vat grown.
Yeah.
Oh, that's even weirder.
So he's just like, oh,
look at the weirdo born from an actual person.
Freak. But he actually talks to a doctor, and the doctor tells him that he's never going to get his voice back. But after 2 months, he could actually start to whisper. But hilariously,
everyone is just like, yeah, you're screwed, George. Yeah. You're never going to speak again. You've been shot through the throat.
He's like, oh no,
that's awful.
But funny enough, it becomes a curiosity, and he says the wound was a curiosity in a small way, and various doctors examined it with clicking of tongues. One of them told me with an air of authority that the bullet had missed my artery by about a millimeter. I don't know how he knew. No one I had met at this time, doctors, nurses, practitioners, or fellow patients, had failed to assure me that a man who is hit through the neck and survives is one of the luckiest creatures alive. I could not help thinking that it would have been luckier not to have been hit at all, which is true. I guess if it had been like a millimeter to the left or right, it would have hit his artery. But if it had been like an inch to the right or the left, it would have missed him. But he learned an important lesson that he's passed on to everybody. Keep your head down.
Keep your head down and don't stand up with the freaking sun behind you.
It's a two-way live fire range, kids. You want to go to a one-way live fire range, that's fun. Two-way live fire range, not so much. And that's the end of the chapter.
Not to have been hit at all. It's interesting because going back through that chapter again, like the thing that I remember the most out of his wounding, I remember him being an idiot and getting shot for it.
Yeah.
I had forgotten that it's so funny that I'd totally forgotten that there was this whole period where he was sure he was dying and was coming up with his last thoughts. But it was like the most, for some reason, the thing that my brain really fixates on is the soup.
Yeah. That would be so painful. Like I've been punched in the throat. I haven't been shot in the throat. And it was like painful to eat or drink for like a day after that. And I can't even imagine what it would be like with a bullet wound and you're trying to get awful Spanish stew.
from the Spanish woman who's just doing it because like the book says I got to do it. So
eat your soup.
I forgot that his friends took all his stuff. It's George's one of the things that I love about this is he's like, this world fits me so well, and I'm so sad and angry that I have to leave it now. And then like look at like the process over the next few months that he has to deal with. He's in the bumpy truck. Yeah. The one guy falls out of his cot, the other dude pukes.
Yeah. It's like, and you can't say anything. He's just like, oh no. You can't complain. It's like the most...
he's dealing with like the Johnny got his gun guy who's breathing through a straw and can only I assume shuffle by and kind of look at you lonely.
I just picture a really sad tuba as he's going by, like boom, 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 boom.
And then of course I love one of the things that I love is that his wife was like, yeah, my wife will be happy that I've been shot. Means I'll probably survive.
Lucky.
All right, so what's your takeaway from this, Bobby?
Keep your head under the parapet. Bullets go both ways. You can take a lot of lessons about broader military science from stories like this. Like we've been talking about how much this affects different aspects of the war, how different positions can offer advantages or disadvantages. Keep your freaking head down. Rifle marksmanship and how it's kind of really dangerous to be within 150 meters of a rifle. The durability of the human body is surprising at times, but also when you go to war, you're taking a real risk. I came back physically okay, but a lot of people don't, and modern weapons will mess you up real quick. They'll take you out of your happy place in a hurry. He was, in his happy place smoking and joking with somebody 1 second, and the next second he got shot through the throat with a full-size rifle cartridge. And if you're thinking that war would be fun, I saw Civil War trending on Twitter today. That's why I'm thinking about this. Like, read something like this, and it will disabuse you of that notion real quick.
This book is so important for people to read. Like, everybody on the modern left really needs to read it. But like just people in general, too many people know Orwell just from 1984 and Animal Farm, and most of those people have never actually read 1984 or Animal Farm. But like this book has been, it was really key that I had read this before I went down to Occupy Wall Street, and it has really given me a lens by which to understand political conflict since then. And it's probably one of the reasons that I haven't gotten sucked into too many other I guess normie traps within politics, either on the left or it was funny. I was talking to a friend of mine because Robert Evans, of course, retweeted and mentioned my Durruti comic on his program. And the thing is, I've been reading Robert Evans stuff since like before I was an anarchist. He probably has had like a large influence on me and maybe part of the reason as to why I am an anarchist today. And the thing is that like I was talking to my friend and we were sort of talking about our political journeys, and I realized like right around the time that I was talking to him and the time that he introduced me to Robert Evans, Evans's work through Cracked at the time, like I was still touting that, Obama would love to do would love to pass gay marriage, but just shucks, the Republic. I was Wombo.
Yeah.
Like 10 years ago.
We were Wombo in 2008.
Yeah, it was. And to see how far we've come from that to where we are now, a big, like, basically we were talking about COVID a little while ago, but I really do see books like Homage to Catalonia serving as inoculation against getting swept up in political propaganda, and also inoculation against getting swept up in tendencies, especially tendencies on the far left, destructive ones, because you see it all here. I also really just love that how much Orwell clearly cares about the world and life, and like you remarked on his ideology, providing those thoughts in his final moments, but also like the attitude towards which he has this thing he loves, which is kind of a now this is happening. It's a fascinating contrast. It's one of the best things about people. So, Bobby, we are at the end. By the way, I am going to apologize to everyone who is watching, and we've got fewer than we normally have, because I, like an idiot, had this thing private for half of the things. I'm sitting there watching. I'm like, oh man, my stock must have fallen. We've got no viewers. We're 30 minutes in. Nobody's even going to comment. Yeah,
do push-ups.
And then, Bobby, you asked me to link that comment that shows the bullet wound through the throat.
Yeah.
And I went to do it, and it says YouTube does not support comments on private videos. This is not private right now. I made it public. We have viewers, but you guys can't comment, and I can't comment back to you because, again, like an idiot, I started this stream private. I am very sorry. So, Bobby, you want to plug your pluggables, and then I'll give my thing because I got a big announcement.
Yeah, I'm Mustache Mafia on YouTube. I don't post enough. I'm trying to get back into some content making at COVID. So watch that channel. I'll be doing some stuff. I've got to do some computer maintenance before I do. Mustache Bob 2 on Twitter. If you are Mustache Bob 1, find me and we will have a duel under the Silver Cup sign in New York. There can be only one. And that's me, man.
Absolutely. And I am Brenton Lengel, poet, playwright, Appalachian Trail 2000 miler, author of Snow White Zombie Apocalypse, and now Durruti Shadow of the People, which last I checked had broken $18,000 on its way to, I think we're going to break 19. I think Durruti actually may wind up bringing in more money than Swaza number 4, which nice. Is, yeah, it's really, really exciting. And I had never thought we'd get this far with my little passion project. Also, this coming Friday, and Bobby, you're going to like this because it's going to add a couple of ulcers to you. I will be debating Stefan Molyneux.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Is he still a thing?
Sort of. He's it's going to be on Modern Day Debate. It will be Stefan Molyneux and JF Garape, noted French Canadian fascist weirdo who literally was funded by the Jeffrey Epstein.
Was he
debating
really?
Me and a Trotskyist known as Swoletariat, who has some great videos
That's a great name.
on how terrible Steven Pinker is.
That's a great name.
I think it's wonderful. Yeah. The Swoletariat in general is one of the better joke memes to come out of the left. And I also just love the idea of leftists who do work out and do push-ups, like you said, because I still remember at Occupy there were occasionally people. They may have been plants or just idiots. But they're all like, oh, this needs to be war, man. We got to go to war. And I'm like, dude, you can't even hold up your sign in a stiff breeze. So that has been Insurrection with Brenton Lengel, special homage to Catalonia Radical Book Club. Please like, subscribe, share this. Everybody, please do share it because, like I said, we have far fewer views on this one than normal due to my idiocy. And I will be posting Bobby's link in the comments as opposed to the chat. Also, go on. There's 3 days left for Durruti Shadow of the People. This is Durruti number 1. It's going to be a huge collector's item. Things are really moving in a great direction with Durruti, and you can go to the page and see all of the folks from Behind the Bastards who are now mentioning bastards down the page. There's like almost 100 of them at this point. All right. So this is from me to all of you. This has been Insurrection with Brenton Lengel and Bobby B of Mustache Mafia signing off.